Strong. All right, next topic.
So we've talked about some good things, talked about some bad things. Let's talk about a confusing thing. Earlier this week, Larry Brown commenting on Anthony Davis. For those of you who don't know, Anthony Davis is the center for the national championship Kentucky Wildcats. He compares him to Bill Russell and says that if he is drafted to the Charlotte Bobcats, he would win, or the Charlotte Bobcats would win 50 games next year. For those of you who don't know, Joe, tell them how many games the Charlotte Bobcats have won this year.
Is it more or less than 6?
It is more. It is 7.
Oh, strong.
It is 7.
Way to go, Charlotte Bobcats.
Correct. The Bobcats are about to set the NBA record for the worst winning percentage in NBA history.
Yeah, they're 7-49, kids. Mm-hmm. Just to give you a sense of how awful that record is. They are 7 games behind the next worst team in the NBA, not in their conference. The next worst team in the NBA is Washington, who has 14 wins. Then New Orleans has 15 wins, and then you skyrocket up to Sacramento at 19. That is an embarrassment of a record.
I think they already clinched the most ping pong balls.
Yeah, I don't know what Larry Brown... Well, by all accounts, Larry Brown said this because he would really, really, really like to coach the Charlotte Bobcats, which just shows you that he has no standards whatsoever about who he coaches.
He rides Michael Jordan like it's his job.
I guess. And I guess I understand the comment from that point, but, he not only said that he would win 50 games, he said that Davis is going to be the next Oscar Robertson, which... that guy is... there are people who legitimately make the argument that Oscar was the best professional basketball player of all time. I disagree with them, but he's in the top 10 for sure, absolutely sure. It's really hard to compare eras in basketball, but he's definitely within the top 10. You can even make a legit argument because of his season where he averaged a triple-double that he was the best. And you're going to put that on Anthony Davis's shoulders going out of... his one-year college career, a kid who is probably still growing, by the way, who hasn't grown into his body yet, a kid who doesn't have big offensive games the way, he doesn't appear to have a complete offensive skill set yet. Mm-hmm. He's a devastating defender, but he doesn't appear to have, and who knows what he's going to be. He's a cipher. To say that he's going to be Oscar, that he's going to lead the Bobcats to 50 wins is... it's not just wrong, it's silly.
Look, I understand that he will be the number 1 pick in the draft because it's hard to find defensive guys that can probably change the game. Now, Larry Brown makes a couple points. He says he's going to erase a lot of mistakes, which is true. The best comparison that I can think of when I see him play is not Tim Duncan, certainly not Bill Russell, although I understand the Bill Russell comparison. I think he's Marcus Camby. Like, for those of you who don't know, Marcus Camby was a phenomenal college player for 3 or 4 years at UMass. Was arguably the second best big man of those 4 years next to Tim Duncan. Camby was a beast and went to the championship game in, I think, in 95 or 96. And they lost to that Kentucky team that was all world.
Yeah.
Look, Camby's had a great career, but would you say that Camby was a game changer? No.
Well, and here's the other thing. We were talking about this too earlier about whether you can compare Anthony Davis to Camby, whether you can compare him to Duncan. Camby and Duncan stayed for multiple years in college. They developed their game. By the end of his career, Camby, who I didn't like as a player, but that was probably because I was a Duncan fan, but you have to admire as a player. He certainly had great skills. He had some legitimate offensive skills, a really strong offensive skill set, which I don't see in Anthony Davis. It's not to say that he won't develop it. The kid was in college for 1 year. He's still developing physically. He might still be growing. He is still developing as a player. So those things are a possibility for him. But there have been a lot of relatively large dudes that came out of college that didn't have a long time they spent in college, got drafted when they were young because they were big, and they never developed an offensive skill set. The league is littered with those guys, and it's not to say they're not good for their team, that they don't have an important role to play on their teams, but they're not game changers. They're not the kind of person that you would say, this person's going to be equivalent to this or that player. Even as a first-year player, Tim Duncan clearly had really strong footwork on the defensive side, which Davis is more of an athlete in terms of his ability to block shots. And Duncan had a real sense of being self-possessed on the offensive side of the ball and was already a really good passer, which I don't think Davis is yet. So who knows what he's going to be, but why you put expectations on the kid like that is beyond me.
I mean, I think that's part of everyone's job. Our job is to kind of think and project where the kid's going to be. I don't have any problems with you making statements of how great he's going to be. When LeBron came out, listen, I've also heard this comment, and I want people to I understand that some people don't like LeBron because of the decision and, you know, maybe him not playing so well in the NBA Finals. Someone said that Anthony Davis is the best incoming NBA player they've seen in the last 25 years.
That's preposterous.
Now, to me, that's insane because that list starts and ends with LeBron James. There's a lot of players who came into the league and have been great over the last 25 years. Duncan's included in that, anyone that was a first-year player in the 90s. But when you look at, if you just take the number one picks, no one thought LeBron James was not going to be what he is right now, which is phenomenal. Like, if Anthony Davis is Marcus Camby, there's nothing wrong with that.
No, Camby had a strong career.
That kind of player will help the Bobcats. But this is no longer that kind of league where a big man, you have to have a big man to win the NBA championship. The Dallas Mavericks proved that last year. I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to make this proclamation. If there are two players in this draft, who I am starting my team with this year, one of them is Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, who was a small forward for Kentucky, who was the offensive machine because you need a wing player. The second player, and I'm going to catch some heat for this, is Doc Rivers' kid, Austin Rivers.
Wow.
And I will tell you why. That kid wants to be great, and he thinks he's great. And there's something to be said about when you have an aura. The shot that he makes against North Carolina to beat them at the buzzer will go down as one of the greatest shots in that rivalry's history. He is not afraid of the moment. Now, some people are going to say, well, he's not a point, he's a two. That's fine. Let him run the show. Look, Michael Westbrook proves to you that you don't have to be a pass-first point guard to make it in the NBA. Oh, how I wish he would come to the Hawks. But those are kind of the guys that we'll start with. Now, I'm not saying I wouldn't draft Anthony Davis, but I only see him as kind of ultimately a defensive specialist. If he proves he can make an outside jump shot, he's still Marcus Camby. Like, here's his floor. His floor is Marcus Camby. Anything less than that, you got to really think about the fact he might be in a bust. But his ceiling is Kevin Garnett.
That's probably true. And you know, again, if you ask any franchise, particularly a franchise that's doing as poorly as the Bobcats are, and you said, hey, would you like a player who's somewhere between a young Marcus Camby and a young Kevin Garnett? They would say, yes, please. Absolutely. Can I have two? Yes. You know, and so that's not a criticism of him. I'm not sure I'm willing to tell you what his floor or his ceiling is, but I can tell you one thing for sure: no one knows because he's so young. Like Duncan, his playing career is not that big because of the change in his body.
Duncan played the same number of years in organized basketball, if I'm right. Duncan played basically when he got to Wake Forest, maybe a year before.
Yeah, Duncan was a potential Olympic swimmer. His sister was actually an Olympic medalist, and he was going to be a swimmer until a hurricane came along and wiped out all the Olympic-sized pools in the Virgin Islands, which is where he grew up, and that's why he turned to basketball. At least that's the story. There's apparently a guy named Chris King who was a player for Wake Forest who saw Duncan play in a high school game and said, we got to get this guy. So Duncan had only been playing organized ball for a couple of years before he gets to college. Same thing is true of Anthony Davis, and Anthony Davis had that big growth spurt where he went from playing a point guard to being a center very quickly. So it's hard to even say that his early period of time was predictive in terms of how he's going to be. No one knows. You know he's got a series of athletic abilities that give you hope that he can be something special. But to say what he's going to be now is just irresponsible and foolish. Nobody knows.
I will say this: the difference between the past and now is the AAU scene in America is outstanding. Kids play against high-level competition all the time, especially when they're an uber athlete. And apparently Anthony Davis was still an uber athlete until he hit the growth spurt, and he became an uber center.
Right.
I'm not saying that he will not play center in the NBA. He's not big enough physically, so he's not going to bang with Horford, Howard, and those boys. But he will play power forward, and there's no reason you couldn't foresee him being what Kevin Garnett is, because Garnett's specialty when he came to the league was defense, intensity, rebounding. The offense came later.
Yeah, that's definitely true. But I'll say this: when I look at Anthony Davis, I see a kid that's going to grow into his body. He has not reached his body size now. He may never get an inch taller, but if you look at the size of his shoulders compared to the rest of him, you can really tell that he's going to bulk up in the NBA. But it's entirely possible he'll grow 2 or 3 more inches after he gets into the league, and then you've got a guy who's more like body-wise, not performance-wise, but more body-wise like a Dwight Howard. Who knows what that will translate to in terms of his ability to play in the league. But that's part of the cipher that is Anthony Davis.
Sure. When I look at Anthony Davis, when I remember Dwight Howard, because Dwight Howard, is from Atlanta. He was a little bit bigger than Anthony Davis is what he is now. And I don't think he'll grow. Like, remember everyone said that about Kevin Garnett? Durant was going to grow into an NBA body. And he's kind of wiry strong. And that's kind of what you will get.
But he has grown. He's gotten taller. And you go back and look at the games from his freshman year in college. He had the thinnest arms of any basketball player I've ever seen. I even thought, and this is one of those times where I was completely wrong, I took a look at him. I couldn't believe he would be a great NBA player because his arms were so freaking thin. And I thought, this guy doesn't have the strength. Well, he's clearly gotten the strength. He's bulked up a lot. He doesn't look bulky, but he's bulked up a lot compared to his college years. And he's grown. He has turned into an amazing player because of how his body changed, and I'm sure because of his dedication to working out and bulking up, which you have to do to play in today's NBA.
So I think we're a little bit, you're not ready to make a proclamation. I think he's somewhere closer than Marcus can be with the upside of a Kevin Garnett.
I mean, I'm willing to say this, he's not Oscar Robertson.